Welcome to the Centerpoint Podcast, where nursing and law unite.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Centerpoint Podcast with Jacquelyn Maki. I'm Matt Skye, and today we'll be delving into the world of legal nurse consulting, unpacking the mysteries of complex medical issues and their legal implications. Jackie, thanks for joining.
Well, thank you, Matt. I'm glad to be talking with you again.
And here we are into episode 3. So we've learned a lot. Let's get started with common pitfalls. What should attorneys avoid when dealing with medical aspects of a case?
One of the pitfalls that I see very commonly is attorneys being sold on a case before they have a medical professional look at the actual records. So they have a client who comes in who's been badly injured. They have a great story. They seem credible, and the attorney will get in touch with me and they are passionate about it. They believe that, you know what, they can get a lot of money for this case, for their client, and they want me to believe it as much as they do. And the goal for me is to always stay objective. You know, it's their job to be there for that client and have the compassion. But the pitfall is when they automatically think, we've got a big case here. I don't know they have a big case. And so I just say, you know what, let me look at the medical records to see what we have.
That's an interesting concept because you usually think of the lawyer as the more dispassionate member of the process. But I guess what you're saying is that a lawyer can become quite wrapped up in a case and see the value in a way that maybe isn't always as objective as it needs to be.
Right. You know, one thing that I have found as I've been on this journey almost 7 years now is that a lot of these proceedings for a case take years. I have a few cases from 2019 that still have not made it to trial. So for years, these attorneys are in touch with these clients. They are the shoulder for them. They're the ones to give them updates continually on their case. You think about it, we go to the physician once a year for a yearly checkup, or if we have something that's catastrophic, such as cancer, we go in for chemotherapy treatments, but we're seeing a bunch of different specialists, right? Until we feel better. Whereas if you're an injured person who has a lawsuit, that one attorney and their team is who is consoling you and there for you for years, consistently. And I know a lot of personal injury medical malpractice attorneys who actually go and visit their clients at their homes. They know them. And so they put on many hats. They become the psychologist. They become, and sometimes the priest mode, the person there that's going to give them the comfort for years. So when I started doing this, I really gained respect for them from that standpoint. And so they do have that compassionate side to them. They have to put it aside as they're preparing for trial, but they have that very compassionate side. And at times they're so passionate about it that having someone come in with fresh eyes who can be a little more objective because they're looking at medical records. I'm not speaking to the client. Sometimes they'll have me speak to the client. They'll say, well, can you just speak to my client? Because a couple months ago, I had one of my clients who sent me medical records. And he said, can you just take a look at this case for me? What do you think? And I said, I don't think you have a case. Here are the reasons why. Well, can you just talk to them? Just get them on the phone, talk to them, and then see what you think. So I interviewed, I listened to them on the phone, asked the pertinent questions, medical questions I needed to ask that he would not think to ask. And then I called him back up and I said, I know what they told you. I understand that, but I'm also looking at the medical records and you do not have a case. And he said, all right, that's what I needed to know. And so a lot of times they realize that can be a pitfall and they'll reach out and say, I need your objectivity. Other times, sometimes they're not very happy. They think they have something good. And I'm like, yeah, no, I don't think so. If you'd like a second opinion, go for it. But not every case is that great. So you have to be there to help them see things objectively and not necessarily passionately. And then there are other times, though, where, Matt, it's been the other way around. And I have the same pitfall where I am passionate about a case. I'll look through the medical records and I'll be angry with what I read because I have a very, high standard for we are there to take care of the patients. And if I'm reading medical records and I see so much negligence that is occurring with the care of a patient and they have a horrible outcome, I'll call the attorney and I'll say, you have a great case here. This case has merit. And I'll tell them why. They'll come back and say, Jackie, it might look good on paper and I understand, but this really isn't a good case for us. And a lot of times it has to do with damages. It has to do with it would cost more to take it to trial than what they would be able to get back for their client. About a year or so ago, a case that I thought was a really good case, one of my clients took to trial and they thought it was a really good case too, and they lost. And I just remember feeling that, how could we possibly have lost? This person, there were the damages, there was evidence that this, it shouldn't have happened. And something bad really did happen. And I even brought in the experts for the client, the attorney client. And, they were able to handle that better than I was. They're used to being in the courtroom. But for me, it was like, how could the jury not see this? So it's a learning curve for me too, and realizing that at times I get too passionate when I know that there's a good case there. And I want to see the best for the outcome of patients that have been hurt.
And Jackie, I'm curious, that's a very personal process. How do you manage the emotional side for yourself and your clients, of course, but for yourself as well, and the hard facts? How do you know when it's leaning one way or the other? What's that process like?
I think from years of being in administration, I've learned how to detach. So I'll catch myself passionate about something. Usually I'm very objective when I'm looking through a medical record. I just got the case. I'm being objective. I am not going to call a case if there's not a case. I want to double check that the standard of care is being met or not being met. But when I'm looking through a record and I continually see that negligence is occurring with a patient, not just once, but there's a continuum of, you see a patient declining, and nursing has charted, we'll monitor as the patient's declining. And then you have a bad outcome. That gets me because we are held to a higher standard as nurses. And so if we have issues, we're supposed to be the advocate for that patient. So when it comes to keeping my emotions in check, it's, okay, I need to channel this. I'm feeling it. I need to channel it and articulate to the best of my ability why there's merit to this case, where the nursing deviated from the standards of care, and let's get justice for this client. So it's almost taking myself out of the situation, removing myself mentally from it to prepare for battle. I guess that would be the best way to look at it. And that's what I do. I just go to a mental space where, okay, now we have to go to the next stage. And that's articulate and get ready for battle.
What does the range of cases look like? I'm sure it's all across the board, but are there I guess, common themes you keep encountering?
Because of the kind of business I run, I see all different kinds of cases. So for CenterPoint, we have 3 umbrellas that I kind of touched on, I think, in the first podcast, but I have personal injury under one umbrella. I have nursing home negligence under another, and I have then hospital or medical malpractice cases, I call them, under another umbrella. So three different umbrellas. And so I see a lot come across my desk. As owner, I want to see every single case. So I do all the intake. At a law firm, you'll have somebody who does all the intake, but it's usually not the attorney. It's somebody else who screens first. I do just the opposite. As the owner, I want to know what's coming across my desk. I determine whether or not it's going to be a good fit. I want to be the one that's the first contact with that attorney. Then, depending on what kind of case it is, I give it to an independent contractor in that specialty. So for instance, OB is not my field, but there are a lot of OB injuries out there. I have 2 really good nurses that are OB nurses that if I have a good med mal practice or the attorney thinks it's a good med mal case come across my desk, I will look at it. I will develop a relationship with the attorney, and then I will say I have an independent contractor who will be doing the case, and then I will be reviewing the work to ensure that it meets the standards for CenterPoint before you get it back. And so that's what we do. So when you ask, is there one kind of case over another? No, because I see so many things. We get OB in here. We have surgery cases that come in. We have car accidents. So there is nothing, if a person is hurt, then we will see them come to us one way or another. And then we'll just match it up with the right people. For me personally, if I'm personally going to be looking at the cases, then they are going to be because they want somebody who has a background in hospital administration, policies and procedures, following what CMS and Joint Commission and some of the other people out there expect for standards to be met. And they want to know how the hospital was being run, how nurses were being trained, et cetera. Or they want me to review a patient that's had surgery or had issues in recovery room or falls. I do a lot of fall cases, many fall cases that I review for both nursing home and for hospitals, because the standards of care for taking care of a patient so that they don't fall are basically the same in a nursing home or a hospital. So I will cover, almost any fall case. And then if for some reason it doesn't fit into my specific area, like I said, I just find the right nurse in my group that does those kind of cases.
Super interesting. I'm curious with the intake process. Is that super time consuming? That is quite different from the legal side, from the lawyer side, that you take all of your own initial contacts.
It is, but for me, it's about having good relationships. And so I want to be the very first face, the very first voice that attorney client hears. So I answer my own phone. In fact, my business phone is my cell phone. And I have clients, that are Pacific time, Eastern time, I'm Central time. So I need to be available to them and make sure that they hear my voice. If they're calling, they have a question, they're concerned about something, or, hey, Jack, I have another case coming in. When can you look at it? I don't want them to have to go through an answering service, and I don't want them to have to go through somebody else. I want that personal contact with them. It helps. It helps with retaining clients. Things change. You'll see people that say, how do you stay competitive? Well, in this business, Matt, like any other business, it really is about relationships. And so if you want to have somebody who's going to tell you that there are no hidden fees, some things I do are flat fees, some are hourly, but there are no hidden fees. They know right up front, this is what it looks like if you have your case done with us. They'll know when at the latest they'll have their case report back to them. If something, happens, I'm not the type of person to hide it. So I'm going to say, you know what? Here's the deal. We lost time for 2 days here, so it's going to be 2 days late. That rarely happens. Usually we're early because that's just the way we're made here. But so the main thing is to have that personal connection, no hidden fees, quick turnover time, and admit when something doesn't go quite as planned, be upfront about it, and just have that open communication. That's how we've built CenterPoint Consulting. And we call it CenterPoint because CenterPoint is where nursing and the law unite. It's the center point of that case. That's what we're here to do, is help build and make their life easier by giving them that knowledge in an easy to understand way to make a difference in their clients' lives.
And in terms of making those differences, in terms of also maintaining that efficiency, I imagine you have to stay up to date with many new developments in healthcare as a legal nurse consultant and in the legal field. How do you stay informed on everything? I assume it's a field that's changing at a rapid rate.
It is, but what I say is, number one, if you're a member of, different groups like I am, and I'm also information, you can have information overload, right? So what I do is I think, okay, where do I want to go? What do I not have yet that I need? And then I determine that those are the kind of conferences I want to go to. Those are the kind of podcasts I want to listen to. Those are the kind of, continuing education credits that I want to have. And so that's what I go after. But also remembering that when we deal with these lawsuits, we're dealing in past time. It's not something that happened right, with what's going to happen. It already happened. So a lot of times I'm not looking at the standards of care from 2024. I'm looking at the standards of care from 2018. I'm looking at the standards of care from 2020. You have to meet the education needs of that time, that point in time. And that's very important to do. So, people say, well, how do you stay abreast of your field? Actually, for the most part, it's pretty easy because we're always looking backward when it comes to helping our attorneys with those cases. What's harder to keep up with when you are a legal nurse consultant, as with anybody who owns a company, if you own a company, it's on what's the latest and greatest for marketing, and what's the latest and greatest for technology. Those are the things that you have to stay up on. And for marketing, it still comes down to they have to know you, they have to like you, they have to trust you. So no matter what, those things don't change. But the big companies can offer certain things at a faster pace than a smaller company. And so there are just different things and hurdles when you're the owner of a business that you're thinking of, no matter if it's legal nurse consulting or not. But for us, for legal nurse consulting, those are the things that I'm more challenged to stay on top of and that drive more of my time than having to worry about keeping up with my current state of nursing affairs, because nursing is what I know, live and breathe. And so for me, staying in tune with that and staying up to date on those changes, that automatically happens. What isn't always in tune that you have to learn quickly to do is stay in tune with the business challenges.
So to the point of retroactively looking at cases and using your base knowledge to really inform you, how do you use technology to more efficiently delve into answers?
Well, I am one of those people that is still kind of skeptical of AI. So I'm not one of those people that automatically goes out and decides I'm going to ask AI the answer to something. So we have depending on what the issue is where we do our research. So if it's an OB case, we're going to look at certain standards that are in areas that only OB uses. If it's the operating room, it's AORN. If it's, depending on where it is, that's where we know to start our research. Then that group, okay, that entity, so to speak. And then from there, I always use Google basically to get to certain things. Also, Up to Date is another group that we use that always has what we need for evidence-based best practice. So it really is just using for technology purposes. Right now, I start with researching through the groups that I know that match the kind of case that I'm dealing with. If for some reason I do not have access to that, I have legal nurses who actually do research for me. So they tend to be legal nurses who teach nursing and still have access to a plethora of items for free that I can say, we're, looking for this certain issue and I need an article from this year. And I can be very specific with them and they actually will do the research for me and find it. And then we can use that to, incorporate it into the report and state, here's what the standard of care was at this point in time. It is an evidence-based resource. And so then it holds water. And that's what's important. You don't want to use AI. And this is what AI said. You really have to have evidence-based practice type research that you are backing what you say. And that's how you build credibility, is that you're able to say, yes, I have the knowledge and the background, but here's the research to back what I'm telling you.
Well, it's funny. It's really like you're operating as a journalist in a lot of ways, getting to that key source material, really having that critical thinking. Are there common resources or training you recommend for legal nurses? I know you touched on it a little bit, but are there any additional recommendations?
No, I wouldn't say that across the board there are. I would say that, well, that's not true. Every nurse should know the Nurse Practice Act for the state of the case that they are dealing with. So every state has what's called the Nurse Practice Act, and it's the standard that they hold every nurse to that's in that state. Next, you have the American Nurses Association, and that also has standards by which every nurse should operate. And then within the American Nurses Association standards, you have the nursing ethics. So bottom line, every legal nurse should have those available to them. So if I have a case in Nevada, the actual scope and or Nurse Practice Act for that state might be different than it is in Wisconsin to some point. So I have to ensure that I'm keeping that in mind when I am looking at what the nurse is doing in a certain area and a certain state. And a lot of times that plays a big role in actually beefing up your stance when you are saying, I know for a fact that what they did fell below the standard of care. Most of the time, if you just go by the American Nurses Association on what we know nursing standards are across the board, that's a really good baseline to start with knowing every nurse, no matter where they're practicing, how they're practicing, needs to meet this standard. They have to. It's what we live and breathe as nurses. And then from there, build, so those are the things that we do and that we know. But then, okay, you have a certain nurse in this area that you're looking at, then you're going to have more research within that certain area, certain things that are standards for OB or ICU or recovery room that are different. So basically, gets down to knowing American Nurses Association standards and your Nurse Practice Act.
How much does the standard of care change when going state by state? Is that a pretty big difference?
No, it's not. But in some states, it's very specific. It's more specific. So, for instance, if you read the Nurse Practice Act for Wisconsin, and that's where I live, it's pretty broad. I would say kind of watered down, maybe even it's not very succinct. You put the Wisconsin Nurse Practice Act next to the Minnesota Nurse Practice Act, and it's amazing. I mean, Minnesota hits specific details that they expect their nurses to do and be. It's very impressive. And when I have cases I'm reviewing in Minnesota, it actually makes my job very easy because I can say they didn't even follow their Nurse Practice Act. So it's good. It's good to have more specific nurse practice acts for at least the legal nurse consulting world. I'm not saying it's necessarily easier for nurses, but like anything, if you know what's expected of you and what your requirements are, then you tend to be better at fulfilling your role. And so I think that's important.
That's very interesting. Also interesting, Minnesota, Wisconsin specifically, that you see this big variation right across the border.
Right.
Maybe you can share some tips with us on how legal nurses and attorneys can work together with super complex medical legal cases, because I'm sure there's a wide range of them, but when it gets very complicated, how do you find that you are able to most effectively work as a team?
Sure. So again, it depends on what they want to use you for, because sometimes they already have certain ways that they practice. But this is how we at CenterPoint can help you. I actually help my clients from reviewing the case. Okay, they come to me and they say, this case is it's complicated. They have a really complicated medical history, and then something bad happened to them. So what can you do? So we start with really delving into all the complications of this case and look at it from the clinical perspective, but also from the hospital administrative perspective or the nursing home administrative perspective, whatever it needs to be. And then from there, we help them every step of the way. So I have attorney clients where it's just very smooth. They'll call me or they'll email me and they'll say, we need help now with reviewing these depositions. Can you tell us, what you think about these depositions or who we should depose? So after we know we have a case and we've settled that part and they file, we also locate the experts before they file. Sometimes it goes either way depending on the attorney client. Then we bring in the right experts for them. After they have the right experts, then we help with deposition questions and reviewing depositions. And basically we're there for every step of the case so that as things come up, the attorney just reaches out via email or phone call and, Jackie, we ran into a snag, or can you help us with this one scenario? And so we go to work at Centerpoint to help them through that. So for instance, they're going to trial. They need some graphs made that will be clear to the jury what occurred. When did the incident occur? What did their vital signs look like? What did that do to their body? What was the major impact because of it? And so we will help make charts that describe what's occurring. And we use the medical records to do that. Then we'll set up the focus groups and moderate the focus group for them so that they get insight from people that could be on a jury and they have an outside perspective. And what's so great about bringing us in, there are a lot of attorneys that will do their own focus groups. So they'll be the moderator for it. The great thing about using someone such as myself is that I'm objective, I'm very personable, they feel like they can talk to me, and they know I'm not the attorney. A lot of times we don't even let them meet the attorney. They have no clue what law firm it's for, and they don't know if it's for plaintiff or defense. So what we do is we bring in an overview of the case, and then we start asking open-ended questions about it so that they'll give us feedback on it. And it's in areas where we think that we might be weak with our case for trial. And so with that information, we then can go back to the drawing board and say, this is where we're weak. This is what I really noticed. And we always record the session so that the attorneys can play it back more than once and get other ideas. But that's where Centerpoint, and me specifically, where I shine, is I have a way of making people feel comfortable. And so they'll open up and they'll be honest with us about their feelings. And because the attorney is not in the room, it makes it even better because they're not prejudiced one way or the other, or thinking, I have to try to give the attorney the answer he wants to hear. So it's really good.
Yeah, that's a significant value Centerpoint seems to bring, being able to keep that objectivity throughout the process. Just curious, so for people listening to this episode, as we wrap up, if you have one major takeaway, one thing you hope they walk away with, one nugget of information, what would that be?
If you are an attorney client with a case, hire a legal nurse consultant at the very beginning. When you think you have a case, let us look at the records before you decide to do anything, because that will help steer you whether or not you take the case and then also what direction to go next. If you bring us in the middle or the end, that still works. We can help you, but at the very beginning is usually the best way.
Well, everybody, thank you so much. You've been watching the Centerpoint Podcast with Jacquelyn Maki. Be sure to like and subscribe. You can learn more at CenterPointConsultingLLC.com. Jackie, again, thank you so much.
Thank you, Matt.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.